I came over from Serbia at age 13 with my mother. My older brother, who was 15 years older than me, had lived in America for a few years and he sent for us. My mum wouldn't be staying, although at the time I wasn't aware of that. But we landed in New York City and the plan was that my brother would come and get us. However, my niece decided to come early and my brother's wife went into labor shortly before we landed. My brother couldn't leave his wife, obviously, so he asked a co-worker of his, they drove cabs, to pick us up in New York City and drive us to New Jersey where him and my sister-in-law lived. When we got to New York City, we waited in customs for what seemed like forever. We looked for my brother, but we didn't see him. This was the early 90s and cell phones weren't as commonplace, and even if they were, my mum didn't have one. So we panicked a bit, not seeing my brother or my sister-in-law, when suddenly we heard our names being called and saw a tall man. He introduced himself in perfect Serbian and explained that he was a good friend of my brother's and then told us about the baby. And he said that he'd be driving us the 2 hours from the airport to my brother's home. My mum finally relaxed and they happily began to converse about the baby and my brother in America. I, however, just felt off. This guy gave me bad vibes, and regardless of my brother's friendship with him, I felt distrustful of him. We drove for a good hour, though, and a half, when he announced that he was going to take us out for breakfast. We hadn't eaten in like 15 hours, so we were starving by then. We pulled up to a house, and my mum and I were really confused. He insisted cheerfully that his wife was cooking us breakfast, and after, we would drive the rest of the way to the hospital to see my family. My mum shushed me when I whispered something didn't feel right, and told me that we needed to be grateful for the hospitality. And so we were led into the house. It was really dark and dank and sort of dirty, and suddenly, I think my mum finally got a bit nervous and started insisting that he take us to my brother. Suddenly, the guy grabbed my mum by the wrist. He told her that he needed a wife to take care of him in his house, and when he heard my brother tell the others at work that she'd be coming to stay, he knew that he'd found a wife. I, at the time, was a scrawny little scamp of a kid, and I tried pushing him off my mum, but he hit me so hard that I just saw stars. At this point, we were terrified, and neither of us really spoke English. We only knew my brother's home number, and he was at the hospital. Also, in Serbia, you don't dial 911, so even if I could, I didn't know that that was how I could call the police anyway. So he tells my mum that she's to clean and cook for him, and he takes me to the basement where I was locked in what I now know is called the laundry room. I banged and cried and yelled, but it was so far down in the basement that everything was muffled. For a week we were kept in this, and for a whole week we were kept in his home. He would lock us up in the basement after my mum cooked him breakfast, and he'd let us out when he would come home at 4. If we had to use the restroom, there was a bathroom, but that was it. Just a bathroom and a laundry room. It was freezing cold down there, and even us huddling together under a blanket did basically nothing. One morning, though, I discovered a small window by climbing on some boxes. I managed to open it, and my mother insisted that I squeeze through it. I didn't want to leave her, and besides, how would I get help if I couldn't read or speak the language? But I didn't want to live this way the rest of my life, so I did what she asked. I ran once I got out, and I'm sure that I was a sight. A scrawny boy with no shoes, only wearing shorts and a t-shirt in the middle of November. However, that is what saved us, as several concerned neighbors tried to get me to come to them, and I wouldn't. I was so terrified. I kept trying to get them to follow me. The police were called, and a very nice policeman tried to get me to go into his car. And then I saw the man who'd taken us drive up in his taxi. He saw the cops, and he just took off. That was when I made a run for his house to get my mum, and needless to say, the cop and his partner ran after me, and my mother was rescued. It took about another 4 hours for them to find someone who spoke our language for us to tell them what happened. A warrant was issued for the man. My brother was contacted. His friend had told him that we never showed up, and my brother had been frantically calling back home in Serbia to find us. He drove up to get us and to give the cops information on his supposed friend so they could find him. But they never did. Back then, before 911, it was easy for someone to disappear. However, it made me very distrustful for a long time of people and their intentions. My mum grew homesick eventually as well, and she ended up going back to Serbia. I stayed and I finished school, and I ended up becoming a cop in the military, thanks to the nice officer that helped me all those years ago. So, this happened to me last week, on Sunday evening. Every Friday, I go to see my boyfriend, who doesn't live in the same city as me, but in the city next to mine. It takes an hour by car to get to his place, and I don't have a driver's license because I live in a big city and I don't need a car to go to my university and my job. I just use the subway. Now, you have to know that it's been really difficult to travel by train in France right now because of all the strikes and whatnot, so a lot of people just travel thanks to carpooling. We have a very famous app to travel like this. It costs less and it's easier to travel as well, so most people use it. I've used this app for almost a year and a half now, and I've never really had any problems. But last Sunday, I go into the app to book a carpool with a woman in her late 40s. I would rather travel with a woman because I'm a girl, 21 years old, and I think it's safer to take a car with a woman. But this time, it definitely wasn't. So I booked my carpool, and she wrote me her personal number. When you book a carpool, the person who posted the ad has access to your phone number if they accept your request, to let me know that she would come and pick me up at 6:20 p.m. So, I go to the meeting place and I'm getting in her car. I immediately notice that she's acting a little bit strange, but I didn't pay it too much attention. As I said, it's only an hour by car to get myself home. What could happen to me? There were no other passengers too, so I was feeling pretty comfortable. So I'm scrolling on my phone and I wasn't watching the road. When you take the carpool, the principle is that the driver takes the highway and does not leave it until we arrive to the destination. Nobody ever gets off the highway, and it's really weird if someone does that because it's the person who booked the carpool who paid for the toll and whatnot. So there's really no reason to not do it. 30 minutes later though, and I notice that we're already at the toll, and I start to watch all over but didn't recognize the toll of my city. I realized then that she got off long before the freeway exits that she was supposed to take. I don't know why, but my survival instinct was pretty much immediately awoken. I took a screenshot of the conversation that I had with her earlier in the day, with her phone number, and sent it to my boyfriend and my half-sister, telling them that if I'm not replying and if they don't have any news from me in an hour, to call the cops. I also turned on my GPS, just in case. Then I asked her what she was doing. Excuse me, why are you leaving the highway? We're not in the right place. And she started to act stranger than before. Yes, I know. I just want to visit this village with you. What? Why? I don't want to go there. I've paid you to drive me to my city. I'm not here to visit anyone with you. Can you please just drive me to my destination? She started to leave the village at some point and took some really dark and creepy road. Don't be afraid, she replied. I just want to spend some time with you. What? I'm not here to spend time with you. There are less than 500 people who live here. There's nothing to do here. Please, just take me to my destination. She said that she takes this road because there's too much traffic elsewhere. I text my boyfriend what she just said to me. He goes on the traffic website and told me that there's absolutely no traffic where I was supposed to go, which means that she's definitely lying. My heart starts to beat faster, and then I decide to pressure her. I have no idea how it came in my mind, but this is what I told her. Listen, lady, you will drive me where you're supposed to, alright? I warned my boyfriend and my sister that you're acting weird. They know where I am, and furthermore, my father is working for Interpol. That's International Criminal Police Organization. And I'm about to text him if you don't take me where I'm supposed to go. And let me tell you that he will definitely find me. She immediately starts to become really anxious and starts to insult me, but she went back to the highway. She didn't know that what I said wasn't totally true. My father really was working for Interpol for more than 10 years, but he actually quit his job when I was about 4 or 5 to go start a new life in another country with my mother, brother, and me as well. after my mother left him because he was violent. He actually left us behind, and I don't talk to him anymore. He's a really toxic person. A good cop, but a really bad person. Violent, alcoholic, a liar. But that's another story for another time. Anyway, she drives me to my destination and asks me to get out of the car right after we pass the toll. And I didn't want to spend any more time with her, and I was glad to be safe. I got home safely eventually, and I immediately contacted the application support service, and they wrote me back, thanked me for warning them, and a few days later, they sent me another email telling me that they're sorry and that they're going to erase her profile. I know that nothing happened to me in the end, which I'm grateful for, believe me, but it was a really creepy situation. I don't know where she was taking me and what she was planning to do, and I'm really glad that I came up with the lie that I did to get out of that situation. And although my father will never know, he maybe saved me that day. I was about 6 years old, and we had gone to a karate tournament for my older brother and father. The whole place had people from this karate club everywhere, and everyone in the club knew me as it was a pretty close-knit group. Also, this was back in the more free-range days of parenting, so I was left at one of the competitions to watch some of the people from our club compete. There was a little girl there who started to be mean to me, but her mother called her over, and soon she was sort of being sickly sweet to me and brought me to her mother to meet her. They said that they were there to watch her brother as well, but the brother was nowhere to be seen, and they didn't seem to know anyone there, which was weird. But after a while, the competition finished, and I got up saying that I had to go and find my parents. The woman then said, "Oh no, you should come and watch my son compete." She grabbed me by the wrist and started to take me with them. I told her that she was hurting my wrist, and she said that it was because she had to hold me tight since it was so crowded in there. I insisted that I needed to see my parents, and she said that she would take me to them. She began to walk towards the door to take us outside and into the parking lot when my father, thank God, stopped us. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded. The woman became very indignant. "I'm taking her to her parents. They're friends of mine." My father then responded, "I'm her parent." My father was in total shock, and the woman just took off out the door before he even knew what was happening. We called the police, but nothing ever really came from it, and we never saw that woman again. And thankfully, I wasn't kidnapped that day. So, I, a 20-year-old female, lived in a really shady as hell apartment complex in an otherwise rich suburban area for 3 years, and have a lot of stories that would fit here, believe me. But this one is about a neighbour that I'll call Bob. So, me, 18 at the time, and my then 16-year-old sister used to babysit all the neighbourhood kids. These kids considered us their friends, and it got to where they seemed to have a sort of radar of when me and my sister were outside. They'd come out and talk to us, and we'd let them ride our skateboards and such in the parking lot. The kids were ages about 8 to 13, I would guess. So one day, we were outside with them, and we were joined by a stranger. He stood between us and our car, towering over us. He introduced himself and asked us to sign a petition that he made. We did, just being friendly. Then he asked us how old we were. I thought maybe he was a fellow teenager that looked older, or that maybe he was just being awkward. So I told him that I was 18, and the very next question was if I wanted to go out with him. It was in front of my mum and the other kid's mum too. I awkwardly declined, but he continued talking about how he thought me and my sister were in middle school. Also, he was apparently 28. Eventually, though, he wandered away to ask someone else to sign his petition. A few days later, he knocked on our door after asking a neighbour for the address. He had a bag of what he said was chicken and wanted us to go and eat it with him at the park or something. We declined because we both had schoolwork to do, and he walked away, and he was mumbling about how antisocial everyone was. Later, we look out our window and see him playing baseball with 2 girls. He kept physically moving their arms to different positions, even though they shrugged him away from him. Next day, one of the kids runs up to me, and I'll call her Maddie. She's 8. She's got a new pair of Heelys and wanted help with them. I was holding her hand and guiding her along when Bob appears and says that he can help better. Maddie says no, but he insists. He pushed me aside and reaches for Maddie, holding her tightly around the upper chest area. Her grandma was there too and flips out, and he eventually wanders off. The next day, Maddie is freaking out, saying Bob was just sitting on her porch when she left for school that morning. Her parents found out, and as they walked outside, he just let himself in, and they said that he went to their kitchen to make orange chicken. We later found out another neighbor had a similar story as well. Another time, we were helping a family move. They have a 2-year-old son. The garages are in a triangle shape to the road, almost sort of like a roundabout. There's a flat patch of grass behind them, and, well, here comes Bob to help us. He criticized the way that we packed things and didn't help, until our neighbor politely asked him to leave. And, well, he left the garage, but instead of leaving, he asked the 2-year-old if he wanted to play. The kid said no, and that made him mad, apparently. He picked up the kid to play, and the kid eventually slapped him. He asked the kid again if he wanted to go behind the garages to play ball, and the kid's mum doesn't notice, so I go with them and guide the kid to his mum. But the climax of this story is when me and my sister went on a walk with our 17-year-old friend and her other friend. Maddie found us too and wanted to come along as well. So we're starting out when Bob comes out. He sees our friend and asks how old she is and how much she weighs because she's so skinny. He asks where we're going, and my friend tells him that we're going for ice cream on a girls' trip. We didn't ask her to say that. He's like, "Oh man," and sort of stomps away. We continue our walk, but halfway through we have a really weird feeling. I look behind us, and Bob is running towards us. He yells at us for hiding from him while also telling Maddie about how pretty she is. An older neighbor sees this and asks him what's going on. He tells the man that we're being mean and he needs to go write a song about us. He leaves, but we see him sitting at the park and, well, he saw us and again comes running. We stop and he asks which one of us is over 18. Maddie's dad is here at this point and tells him that we aren't interested in him. He explodes at this point, telling the dad to fuck himself and that he's so rude. Then he called me a bitch. Maddie's crying, and the neighbor who saw us before came to check on us since he saw Bob running, and Bob eventually goes inside, muttering to himself again. For weeks, we actually don't see him. A single dad and his 5-year-old daughter move in, and we're introducing ourselves to them, and my mum kind of tips him off that there's someone in their building who's a little off, especially around Maddie. The dad says that he's seen someone like that giving kids candy at the pool and the kids looked uncomfortable. And well, here comes Bob, as if on cue. He immediately tells the girl, in front of her dad too, that she looks like a movie star and that she's so pretty. He asks to play with her, but the dad says no and they go inside. Turns out they were next door neighbors, which was very unfortunate for them. We still didn't see him much after that, but other neighbors were telling us stories about him. There's a woman who's alone most of the day with her 2 kids under 5 who told us that he watches her when she goes to and from her car. Also, Maddie's parents continued to see him watching her as well. And then one day, we're again just babysitting, and here he comes again. Only this time, he's swinging nunchucks around. Maddie screams and hides in our car. Bob strolls over with his nunchucks and starts talking to us all casual. Then his head cranes to look into the car and he says, "Where's Maddie?" We told him that she wasn't here and he walks away. By then, most of the kids were afraid to go outside when they saw him. He had a habit of wandering around the complex. We could tell by his height and lanky gait as well when he was coming. A few times we'd seen Bob with his dad, and those times, neither of them even glanced at us. Then one day he just sort of stopped showing up. We'd see his dad and brother come in and out all the time, but we never saw him. We only saw him again maybe a year later, and it was only for one day near Christmas, and then he disappeared again. So I don't really know what happened to him, but it was just one of our weird experiences with the neighborhood in the 3 years that we lived there. Maybe I'll share some other stories about some chick that tried to kill her parents because she was a witch, or the old man that bites children next, if you'd like to hear them. But this story is definitely one of the ones that made me feel the most ickiest, and it was creepy.